We are going to follow the money.
Everything you need to know can be understood with this simple phrase: follow the money. And believe me, that's what's happened.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
Welcome to College Sports Follow the Money, an all-new podcast diving into the critical issues surrounding the big business of college sports. I'm Andrew Monaco, joined by former president of Texas A&M University and former chancellor at the University of Missouri, Dr. Bowen Loftin, and former vice president and general manager of Fox Sports Southwest, Jon Heidtke. From NIL to the transfer portal and opt-outs, to the college football playoff, conference realignment, and more, we tackle the key issues facing college athletics today and into the future.
I need to feel you, Jerry! Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money! Show me the money! He's the loudest black man!
We welcome you inside as we follow the money. Our College Sports Follow the Money, collegesportsftm@gmail.com is how you can get in touch with us. And along with Dr. Bowen Loftin and Jon Heidtke, I'm Andrew Monaco. And it's been a little while, a tad longer than when we normally get together, but I'm going to borrow a phrase that I use for my football crew. The trio of mischief is back, and I figure it's perfect because it's mischief night tonight. Howdy, my friends.
Howdy, Andrew.
Howdy, Andrew.
Good to see you, Dr. Loftin. I trust that your trip went well.
It did. It was exhausting, but an extraordinary trip. I learned one important word in Arabic. No, the word for no. Everywhere you go, everyone wants to sell you something. And so I had to say no a million times as I walked through the markets and around the various venues we attended there. We went to many temples, burial places, pyramids, things like that. So it was an extraordinary trip. But it pushed me to my limits physically, an old man like me. I'm not young like you two. So I was challenged. My young wife, sprints around all the time like a young gazelle. So I had to keep up with her as best I could. But it was a traveling Aggies plus trip. We had two people from Ole Miss, and we had three from Indiana U. And Indiana U people were talking a lot about their coach, by the way.
A fairly successful one, and
well
I'm going to take fairly out of that statement. Very successful, Curt Cignetti.
Exactly. So we had a little bit of football time, but mostly it was about artifacts that were several thousand years old.
Fantastic.
Did Karen ride a camel? Did she race a camel?
I was just going to.
She got to ride a camel. I would say the real highlight. We were in Edfu when we joined our boat there, and we went to a temple, and they took us there in horse-drawn carriages. So I spoke sort of. I didn't know if the driver knew any English or not, so I spoke in English to my wife. Said, "I bet you would love to be able to drive this carriage." So he hands the reins to her, and she had the best time, literally cantering this horse through a very busy street with all kinds of cars and bicycles and you name it there, pedestrians, And she had the best old time doing that. It was fantastic. So
sometimes
she had a great
on trips, it's what's not scripted, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right, my friend.
Absolutely awesome. Well, you were talking about coaches, and I know here we are as the month goes to November, and we focus on the conference races with an eye on the CFP. But Dr. Loftin, there are coaches on the hot seat, and you know that there is a cost and a price to pay if you are planning on or if you are going to change a coach.
Exactly right, Andrew. I want you guys to talk about a few things in particular where your expertise really will help us understand some of the nuances here. But the big picture is this. The USA Today survey came out just a couple of days ago, which gives us a list of the coaching salaries for most schools. A few of the privates are difficult to get a hold of, but it's out there. And of course, Kirby Smart reigns supreme right now over that list there. And the coaches we know best kind of fall down below that. What you have to understand is the ranking there is by their regular guaranteed salary without bonuses being included. And so what sticks out about the A&M coach is that when you get to Mike Elko's number, which is fairly small down the list of SEC coaches, you see off to the side there the possible bonus he can get this year, which is like half his salary. And so he has that kind of distinction right now with it. But I've been looking at that and looking at also the buyouts, because as you said, Andrew, we're a part of the season when not just success is looked at, but also lack of success is looked at. And there are a number of coaches, I think, around the country. A few have already fallen. East Carolina, for example, has fallen recently. And so a few have already been fired, mid-season, basically, which isn't common, but happened. We understand that. Others are on the bubble. What I find interesting is at this point in time, no Big Ten or SEC coach has been fired yet. So those coaches are still in play, but there are a few which are questionable. We just talked about before this recording began a very outstanding coach in Indiana who's come along, and he's not very well paid by the standards of even the Big Ten, yet he's had an extraordinary season, like a good run. His whole career as a head coach has been significant. Since 2011, he's been head coaching, and he has a very enviable record, in my opinion. And Indiana's lucky to have him, and they're getting at a bargain price, if you ask me. So here they are. Is it the first time they're in the CFP running right now, guys? I think they could think that he is. So they are.
Tom
right now.
Allen had them close, did he not, John? Mid to late 2010s.
They had the quarterback, right? That was pretty good, and then he transferred somewhere. His name escapes me.
But this is definitely, Dr. Loftin, to your point, it's been Ohio State, it's been Michigan, right? In the Big Ten, it's been Penn State. Usually it's been those every once in a while, P.J. Fleck in Minnesota, every once in a while, what Pat Fitzgerald did when he was still at Northwestern. You're right. So as a rising coach like this, and he's got more experience than we think, now other schools start taking their eyes and say, ooh, does he fit us? This is interesting. It's not just Indiana. Can they keep him? Are there other teams or other schools taking a look at him, right?
Exactly. This guy has 127 wins to 35 losses since his beginning head coach job in 2011. That's not bad, guys. I don't care how you look at it. That's not bad for a record. So it's a sustained record. It's not like it's just ephemeral. It's a sustained record. So IU got a very good coach at a bargain basement price, in my opinion. And I think depending on how this year comes out, no matter what happens now, he has to get a significant pay raise beginning next year, I suspect. And you're right. I think others will come looking for a guy like that clearly made it work. Contrast that with a guy over to the east of us in Florida named Billy Napier. And you have to ask the question of where is he going to be? This guy came in, I'll never forget the press conference that introduced him, and he spoke to the group, and he said, I'm going to frustrate you. Think about it. He said, I'm going to frustrate you. And I think he has. He came in saying, I'm going to patiently build a very solid program here at UF. And I think he's done a lot of things to try to make that happen. But I think you have to ask the question, what's the win-loss? Look at right now. It's not.
And how much
good.
Patience?
Yes, how much can you have? These days and times, we know how patience wears thin pretty darn quick. And that's a question I have for you two to ponder. I mean, have you seen this happen over your lifetime? I mean, we've had coaches in the past that lasted 20, 30 years. That's kind of gone away, guys. What is the window that a coach has to really do it as opposed to getting thrown the door? What's the window?
I don't think there really is a window. I mean, with the
I think I was thinking the same thing,
are going to go. If you haven't won in year two, what would go wrong? So and again, that's the really the $64,000 question that you look here. I was looking at this data that you sent, Dr. Loftin, and the thing that strikes me is, let's just say Georgia loses to Ole Miss and Tennessee. Their fans are going to be up in arms and saying he's outdated. Look at this, but it's going to cost them a cool $118 million to buy out Coach Smart. So that could temper those conversations pretty quickly. But if Georgia loses another game, there'll be some fans wanting to see him go. We need to get Cincinnati. He's the next great guy. Kirby's run his deal. He's got his 2 championships. it's just crazy. I think what expectations are for this fan base, and how do you manage that? That would be very hard to temper.
It really is. I mean,
There's an old
Napier's
rule of
buyout
thumb.
is like 27 million, so it's not like it's anything where Jimbo was or Smart is right now. So it's not exorbitant by comparison to some, but it's still significant. When you look at the fact, guys, that beginning next year, likely these schools will be paying over $20 million out of their budget to their athletes. So if you shell out 27 million today, will you have 20 million left in a few months to be able to begin paying your players? That's a good question to ask yourself. That's going to give, I think, some ATs and maybe even some boards a little pause about spending other people's money. We'll have to see how that plays out anyway. But I was just looking at the list. I mean, Nick Saban's kind of my benchmark. So his last year as a head coach, his base was 11.4 million. And now Kirby is in there at 13.3 million. Sweeney's number 2 at 11.1, and Sarkisian at 10.6. What I find interesting, this is something else I want you to comment on. I looked at both the Big Ten and the SEC. The average head coach salary right now in the let me find my numbers here. The average salary, where did I put that number now? I'm going to find it right quick. In the Big Ten is 6.8 million. That's Big Ten. SEC is 8.1. Now, that's a pretty big markup for two conferences that are arguably fairly close together in terms of revenue.
It's the difference between the top and the bottom in the conferences.
That's probably what it is.
Yeah.
And of course, the Big Ten's a little bigger, obviously, given not their coast-to-coast coverage right now. But I just found it curious that there was that much of a gap between the average. And maybe it's just an anomaly because you said of the outliers that exist there. But I thought you would like to comment on that particular fact.
It's the going rate. I hate to say that. It's the going rate. And it becomes the arms race. And it comes in salary. If you want to bring in Mike Elko, this is what it's going to cost. If not, Mike stays at Duke. And I think that's what other coaches can do now. You have that. Jeff Lebby, if you want to bring him into Mississippi State, very similar contracts as you had brought up some episodes ago with here's the base might be a little lower and you get a lot more in your incentives. And the programs that are changed, Eli Drinkwitz, you want Missouri to be good and sustain success, you have to pay for that. So I find that interesting. But I think some of the haves and the have-nots are already in the conference. Clark Lee's having a great year and is probably in line for a raise at Vanderbilt. But right now he's in that lower he's below that average. So, yeah, I wanted to add something before. There used to be an old saying that when you won a national championship, you got 5 years. Ed Orgeron got 2 years. Yeah. That accelerates that window. And one other thing about the coaches, not just the buyout. Let's look at Auburn. They would be paying 4 coaches if they get rid of Hugh Freeze. More considerate, not just buyout. That's buyout times 4 plus new head coach coming in. And Dr. Loftin, I love what you said. Now you're adding the cover charge, right? To be in the NCAA and to cover that cost.
These fans calling for coach's head have to understand it's not just the coach. That salary is known and very well known, and the buyouts well known. But what you don't always look at carefully is that the coordinators, which now have multi-year contracts. In my early day, it was a 1-year contract for a coordinator. Now 3 is the going number, and that just adds up. So you got a coordinator making $2-3 million over a 3-year period. That buyout can be substantial as well. And people don't always think about those ancillary costs that go along with moving to another coach here. And again, we have this added complexity of the House settlement, which will likely generate an extra cost of $20 million a year, which is, arguably at least 2 head coaches. Okay, right there. But just to give you the rest numbers here, look at beyond the Big Ten and the SEC. The ACC average coaching salary is $5.8 million, and the average in the Big 12 is $4.9 million. Do you think that is a way of measuring a conference, looking at the average head coaching salary, guys?
I think what that average tells you is that basically it kind of corresponds to whatever revenue that they're generating from an overall perspective. So, I mean, the Big Ten should be higher because they're generating the most revenue. SEC should be second. So I think, again, that's just another validation of correlation to the amount of revenue those teams or those conferences are bringing in. I do think one interesting point that you made, Dr. Loftin, is that I think, again, most of these contracts were done before NIL and the House settlement. So as we move forward, I think you're going to see a correction in these types of agreements. And I think you're going to see a lot more deals like Coach Elko's, where, again, he's going to get a base, but depending on how well a performance does, he can almost double his salary. And I think, again, that's the type of thing. People have been paying coaches now like they've won or will win a national championship. And now I think, again, they're going to have to earn that additional money in terms of what their performance is. Yeah. But still, at the end of the day, if $7 million is my base salary, that's not a bad place to be.
Well, back to Signetti.
That's Monaco money.
Yeah, Signetti is doing
You
very
need to
well.
move the decimal.
He's making $4.25 million right now at Indiana. I looked at DeBoer's record here. I thought it was interesting that he made $1.5 million in the 2021 year, $3.5 million in 2022, $4 million in 2023, and $10 million in 2024. That's a pretty rapid rise. Does that reflect true measure of recognizing his value, or is it a competitive thing to keep him? Or what really drives that kind of pretty extraordinary pay raise rate for a coach?
I think it's more the marketplace. I remember Kingsbury. I remember when his deal was, but like over a 4-year period, he went from a GA at the University of Houston making, I don't know, $14,000 to making $4 million as Tech's head coach. I mean, it was astronomical over a 4-year period that he hit. And I think, again, because of the quarterback he was coaching it then, certainly put him as one of the, on the fast track. And I think, again, this industry, when they see someone like that or a coach who has that sort of success and they can trace that success primarily to the coach versus the player, then I think, again, you're going to see some of those very weird hockey stick type of salary escalations.
I think it correlates with the lack of patience as well. Yeah. The higher the salary, the lack of patience.
At East Carolina's firing of Mike Houston, and that loss to Army was I'm sure heartbreaking to many and not expected, and it happened, and he's gone now. So the salary there, he was making 1.4 a year at ECU, and the way it's structured, his buyout's $3 million. So that's kind of the lower end of what I'm seeing right now. On the other hand, Napier's is almost $27 million. It gives you a sense of the range right now that's out there. The Maryland coach is probably on the bubble somewhere as well right now, and his buyout is a bit over $17 million. So those kind of pale compared to somebody we could name, but it's still money that's real and significant money. And as you pointed out, Andrew, it's not just one coach when you change out. Mm-hmm. It's going to be other coaches. You're talking about not only having to pay off coordinators and assistant coaches, you're also going to be hiring new ones as well. Even though that may be spread over years, it's still going to be an issue of how you pay your base. Your nut is going to still be there. Plus, you got to pay off the guys you got rid of, and that's not trivial for a lot of schools. I think the SEC and Big Ten schools are kind of alone in being able to absorb some of this. And my question for you really looks at how donors play into this versus how the school itself has to deal with it. In some cases, it appears that the school itself is absorbing the money, the cost of doing these kind of things. Whereas other cases, it sounds like maybe one or a few donors who come in to write big checks to help offset that. Do you have a sense of how this may have shifted over time? And is it a real issue of how we pay this guy off? Is it going to be out of our own hides as a university and a department? Or is it going to be somebody coming in to White Knight coming in to help us get through all of this?
I think, again, in these situations, schools that have that donor base that can do it, they'll probably be able to want to pull the trigger a little quicker. I think in other markets, if a school doesn't have that donor base and the athletic department's going to have to absorb all that, they're going to probably think long and hard about that and see what the appropriate strategy is. So, again, you talked about Napier. I mean, that team seems to be playing better now, and if they're going to probably beat Florida State. Which is a big rivalry game. And if they give Georgia a game this week, and again, I watched them play the other day, and I thought they played pretty well. Who to beat Kentucky? They looked pretty dominant in doing it. At one point, Kentucky was a top 15, top 20 team. So, again, it takes a while for this stuff to click sometimes. You ever once in a while you catch lightning in a bottle, but that's the exception rather than the rule. How do you build a sustainable program? And again, I think it's hard for the average fan to see that because they're not in the locker room, they're not at the practice fields they're not seeing what's happening, they're not seeing how the portal's working, they're not exposed to all that. But usually on Saturday afternoon, you can kind of see that performance there too. And sometimes you may not win the games, but the team played very, very well. I mean, it's again like the Vanderbilt situation. I think again, Clark Lee's a good coach, but having that quarterback has really helped him, immensely through that process. So it's probably not just one thing; it's a faction of things, and you hope you can catch that lightning in a bottle that gives you those opportunities that puts you at the top of everybody's. I got to have him as my next coach list if and when that carousel starts.
And I think fit has to come into play here. I bring this up a lot, and I don't mean to pick on him because he's a very good coach. But when Rich Rodriguez went from West Virginia to Michigan, you can't tell Michigan 3 yards in a cloud of dust that we're now going to spread and expect to have immediate success. That takes time. So if it's one thing, okay, we want to get rid of this guy. What's the old saying about the 3 envelopes in a GM, right? or the coach says, blame the players, blame the fans, make 3 new envelopes, right? You better know who your next is and don't just go for the hot coach because it may not fit wherever you are. That could be any school. Mike Elko fits Texas A&M. Rich Rodriguez did not fit Michigan. Now, if he had more time, he may have, but it would have been very different. They brought in Brady Hoke, a Michigan guy, right, who was at San Diego State. Then they bring in Harbaugh, and that's where they want a Michigan guy for the most part. You also have to, I think, that has to come into play. And only that AD and only those boosters have to know. National perception means nothing. You've got to make sure that you've got the right fit and not just making a change just to make a change. If you do that, then you're just on a hamster wheel, replacing coaches every so many years.
I want to come back to a question about the portal in here, but just to finish all my numbers here, the last one I looked at here was Southern Miss fired Will Hall, and the cost was $860,000. So that was the kind of bargain basement situation there in terms of a firing a coach, and the cost to you. Of course, Southern Miss is not as a Group of 5 school, not really with the kind of financial resources that the Power 4 have. But it's still, out there as a number to give you a sense of where the range might be. In talking about Napier again, I was there on the sidelines when Texas A&M went to play Florida, and I tell you, the crowd was really nasty. They were yelling, and you heard it too, Andrew. They were yelling and screaming about him. The team looked like it was sleepwalking much of the game. The A&M score was like 13 points over, but most people would say it was not reflecting of how one side of that game really was, in comparing to other games out there. Yet since that time, they seem to have regrouped a bit. And again, Napier made a lot, and so did his AD, about patience and building. And I've looked at what Napier did with the portal. He seemed to be very careful and very selective about the portal. And so that's the question I wanted to pose to you guys to think about a little bit is when a head coach leaves or even a coordinator is fired. That's happened, as you know, very recently. Mm-hmm. How do the players take that? If that firing leads to players opting for the portal and walking away, is that a factor when you consider the firing of a coach or, for that matter, of a coordinator and losing a couple of key players because they liked that particular coach? They were maybe recruited by that coach. They played for that coach, and all of a sudden now that coach has been shown the door. And do I need to look around too? Is that the question out there? So how much of a factor should that be, guys, as we look at the potential of head coaches being fired, or corners being fired going forward?
I think you can look at one of the poster cases, that is Colorado. I mean, everybody wanted to go with Coach Prime, so that basically half his old former school all went with him up there. And so I think, again, a coach is a big part of it. I think, again, with these kids signing up to NIL now may change that. Somebody just, I don't care who my coach is, just pay me. at the end of the day. But I do think, you cut through it, then I think that player-coach relationship is very important, and that style of play, and certain guys are fit for certain offenses or certain defenses. So, I think that's always going to play an important role. But now you've got the whole NIL thing and I think, again, if a coach leaves, and again, there's a player that people want, the Wolves are going to be howling at the door pretty quickly to that player and saying, the grass is a lot greener over here. Come on, young man, and we've got the resources to pay you.
I think it speaks to recruiting about the difference between a relationship and a transaction.
Yeah.
I think when there's a relationship, I think it's actually a little bit harder to retain because that defensive coordinator or that line coach probably has more of a relationship with that D lineman or that offensive lineman or that running back. And if he goes somewhere, he may go with him. If it's just a transaction, well, coaching change, I've got a 30-day window and I can go get this much money just for a visit to this school. You can do that. And conversely, I think when a coach is coming in, I think he has to understand a couple of things. Who are the personnel who have stayed? And can I convince that quarterback to stay or that running back to stay? I think that's a consideration of if you say yes or no to that job. But I think I think those personal relationships, Dr. Loftin, have a lot to do with whether a player goes, not, or what is he getting out of his collegiate career. Is it just a paycheck? Well, then he's going to go to where he thinks he can get the most money. If it's a relationship, then I may go with this guy to the new school, unless I can be convinced.
It was clearly showing up at Texas A&M when the baseball coach went to Austin. And initially, Early was going to go there with him, and all of a sudden that all changed. And Early came back to A&M, and guess what? A huge chunk of the team came back who was initially planning on moving with Schloss to Austin. I thought that was an example of what you're just saying. Obviously, Early had a relationship with a bunch of those players, and that relationship was really gold in terms of they're seeing him as the man they wanted to play for, and they left the guy they had played for and agreed to go with when Early decided to come and deal with A&M's head coaching position. And so that to me was one of the greatest examples I've seen of a coach being able to bring players back from the brink in terms of where they were going to go. So that was an impressive display to me the end of the last season of baseball.
I think the other thing was the players asked to talk to Trev Alberts, and it's okay. What's the plan here? Mm-hmm. So there was some ownership there. We know the former players, what they said about Michael Early. And then you have these current players. John, for an AD, you've got to be plugged in and you can't just say, trust us, right? There's now a 30-day window that you have as soon as that change is made. Even in that 30 days, there were visits by other schools to players in the portal even before the announcement. So it's almost like you need a little more transparency from that athletic department and athletic director with student athletes now.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It goes back to your point, Andrew, which is a very good one. You've got to have those relationships. These can't be transactions. And in this day and age, particularly with NIL, it's just one part of it. The transfer portal adds to this. All that just has moved more of the leverage, if you will, to the players' side of the equation. So there's a lot more opportunities for them to potentially leave on whatever accord that they want. It used to be you had to go through a lot of hoops to do it. Now you don't, and that relationship's important, which I think those universities or programs that sort of have more transparency to it are certainly going to want to hopefully maintain the players that they want to keep, that believe in that same type of relationship, structure. So I think it's going to continue to be interesting. But again, that ties all to that player deal. And I think you see all these research that says, hey, at the end of the day, in this new world, is how much money am I going to get paid is one of the, still the number one factor when it's all said and done. So that's why that relationship has got to be important, because that can overcome that, because it's not a transaction, it's truly a relationship.
Now to the unintended consequences part of our show.
We should just change.
Dr. Loftin, you talked about this. Now, how does the 12-team CFP timing? We know early signing period was affected. Now, how does it affect with a coach's search? Do you fire early so you get a head start?
That's
do you wait? Here we go again, right? When all these things start merging with one another.
Well, we had a decade of stability with a 4-team playoff. Okay, pretty much people understood the windows of opportunity and when things had to be decided. And now we have a longer period. We got 12 teams in the mix right now, and the portal issue is out there now. The NCAA has come and shrunk the portal a number from 45 days to 30 days now, alongside the early signing change, as you already noted, Andrew. And so that's out there. And my crystal ball is too cloudy for me to understand where this is going to take us. That's why you guys are here. You're the real prognosticators. And we can always turn to you and say, what does this really mean? So I'm just asking the question, do you think we're going to have a different sort of play out of this coaching carousel with a 12-team playoff, which is over more time, with a different kind of portal window and different early signing period in time? Is that going to really make a difference for us now, guys?
Well, I think you got to go back, and if you're a program and you're going to make a change, it's just inevitable. Do you make that change now versus wait till the season's over? I mean, I think I've heard different schools on thoughts of that, but I think in this day and age, if you're absolutely 100%, nothing that you can't let it come down to one game at the end of the season. If you beat said rival, it's going to keep me around. There's probably been enough body of work or evidence that's going to say I really need to move on from this coach. So I think, again, in that particular situation, then if you're the first one out, your agents can get out there and start talking to the coaches you want agents and develop have a better, runway to get a deal done like that. If you can, even waiting up until if that school's playing in the playoffs and gets to the championship game, that's going to be another month of the season basically before you can hire someone. But that does put you in a hold. You lose a whole recruiting cycle and everything else out there. So. But I do think if I was a program and I knew I was going to make a change, and let's say I wanted to get the Iowa coach or the Indiana coach and make sure I'm talking to him, I let my guy go now, and then I start really making sure my agents are talking to his agents and seeing if there's a fit there. And then so I know that I've got a pretty good sense that even if that coach is in the playoffs, I've got a shot at getting him as soon as that season's over. But if I'm also Indiana, the same thing I'm doing is making sure I'm giving him everything he needs to make sure that he wants to stay. So again, said coach would have a lot of leverage in that particular scenario to make sure he gets the best of both worlds. If he wants to leave, great, he's going to get a wonderful deal. If he wants to stay and realizes there's a couple of shortcomings, he really has an opportunity to hammer that point home too.
Jon, sometimes when a school does not hire someone in a time period is a clue as well that they may have a deal for when the other coach's season comes to a close, correct?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And
I think you're going to see more of those. If it happens in this cycle, I think you'll see somebody who will fire a coach of a program that should be a blue blood, but is not. And if they don't make a quick decision, there's a good chance that coach is probably in one of those teams that's still playing. Could it be the head coach? Could it be his top coordinator? But that's probably a pretty good indicator, like you said, Andrew.
Yeah, and I find the timing also fascinating. Like sometimes earlier is better. It may be a short-term hit for the last couple of weeks of the season for the team that is firing the coach and then having to go through the interim. But do you get the head starts on the lay of the land? Jon, the other fascinating thing is this is now when agents like to get raises for their guys. They may not go at all.
Yeah.
But if you express interest, now it's time for the program, as we were talking about with Curt Cignetti, now it's time for that program to pony up. If you want me to stay, you need to do that. That becomes a fascinating part in a coaching search as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing. If you're a head coach right now, are you really worried about who's got on next week on the schedule? You probably don't have time to sit down with your AD and spend that amount of time. So that's where your agent really earns his money, his or her money, working through that particular process. Here's lots of things that I need. Go talk to him. And the AD is going to have somebody he's going to send to talk to that person. So there's all these, backroom conversations going on. So somebody says, well, I never talked directly to such and such. Well, yeah, sure. But all these other conversations were going on into the meantime, and you were pretty well kept in the loop. But that's neither here nor there. But I do think, again, that's for if you are that coach, you have a list of things that you want to help build your program. And now is a wonderful time to ask Santa to bring that list for Christmas.
Because everybody's generous, right? Yeah. Your donors are generous right now if you're Indiana.
And if I'm glad, I want to go to those donors now while they have that euphoria. Again, Indiana winning against Wisconsin the other day. That was a big game. I mean, I remember going to a game back then when I was at ESPN, and there may have been 3,000 people in that stadium. But they had a basketball game the night before, and they had 15,000 for that. So,
yeah.
Well, back in my day, guys, the real question mark to me was Mike Sherman. And 2011, that season was pretty problematic for me and many others. And we watched a lot of second half meltdowns that just didn't work for us. And we got to the Texas game at the end of that season, and that loss was heartbreaking to most of us. And so it became clear to me that Sherman had to move on. So it was the question I really had to grapple with the AD was, do we do it now or do we do it later? And my opinion, which prevailed, was we do it now. And it wasn't handled right. I'll be the first to say that. That's a whole other story. But it happened very quickly, and it meant the search for a new coach could begin very quickly. And to his credit, Bill Byrne had a good list in his pocket, and we began marching through coaches pretty quickly. He happened to go. We failed to connect with the right coaches. We tried several coaches that were successful setting head coaches. We got down to the time of the NFF, which at that time was meeting in New York still. And I'll never forget, Bill went there, and I didn't go to that particular one, but Bill went there, and he calls me after the first night. He says, "I've got the guy." And so he said, "Kevin Sumlin seems to be the guy we want to bring to Texas A&M." And so I quickly organized what I needed in terms of support from the board, especially to get that process underway. So the AD, found the guy, but I had to sort of close the deal by getting the board behind that decision and nailing down a contract framework for it. You mentioned agents. When we met with Sumlin in a hotel in Sugar Land, I had two regents with me and Bill, and we had a 2 to 3 hour meeting there. And finally, I said, "Kevin, would you leave the room for a few minutes?" We sat down and agreed, this is the guy. Let's make him an offer. And I shared with my two regents that were there what I thought the offer should be. They were okay with that. Bill and I'd already talked that through before we got there. And so brought him back in and said, "Here's the offer." He said, "Fine." Shook my hand, and that was the end of it, we thought. Then the agent got involved. Mm-hmm. It took weeks to get that contract done. I had a handshake from the coach on the basic terms of the contract. I had a sheet there in my pocket to write down with and everything. So it wasn't like it was a verbal thing only. I handed it to him. He was okay with it. I was okay with it. Regents were okay with it. AD was okay with it, but his agent wasn't okay with it. And so it took a lot of negotiation, and I had to get personally involved in that, which I hate to do, but I had to deal with that myself somewhat. So it took weeks to nail down the final contract. Meanwhile, Sherman is gone. We have a bowl game, and we have the coordinator come in and run that game for us in Houston. And it was successful, obviously. We played Northwestern, I want to say, that particular game. And it was successful for us, but their president and our friends, Marty was quite a character. We enjoyed meeting each other again at that game there and having a lot of fun with it. But he's a serious person in terms of sports when he was Northwestern, and he and I had a similar mindset towards these things. But my point to you is, so the agents can have a whole nother ball game out there, and they have to justify their value to a guy or a girl in terms of being their agent and earning their fraction of that pay. And that's a very difficult part of the equation, I think. Almost as hard as interacting with Jerry Jones for a contract on playing games at AT&T Stadium. So another whole story.
Dr. Loftin, at that time, A&M's going to the SEC. It reminds me of Lincoln Riley was rumored to go to LSU. Instead, he goes to USC, and then they go into the Big Ten. Was changing conferences part of the thought of who the next head coach would be?
Yes, it had to be. I'd had several meetings with Mike Sherman. Mike was very opposed to going to the SEC. The two coaches on my teams here that were really opposed were him and Turgeon, the basketball coach, and for different reasons somewhat. But I think Mike would never articulate exactly what his core problem was, but it had to be, it's a harder place to play. I mean, he knew he was on the bubble already when we were talking about this. And he and I met more than once, and we talked it through privately. And he never stopped telling me it's the wrong thing for football at Texas A&M to go to the SEC. Well, I think most people would agree we're in the right place right now. But my point to you, and that's a coach. That's just a coach saying it. But I had coaches that were really eager. Pat Henry, track and field, was eager to go to the SEC. Gary Blair, eager. But these guys had coached in the SEC already, and they saw it as a great place to be. Turgeon had not. Turgeon went to Maryland, you may recall. He left voluntarily. Nobody fired him. He left voluntarily, went to Maryland. Arguably not the best record there, and something to what he was able to do. But Maryland was a basketball-friendly school, much more than A&M loves basketball, but it's not football. And in Maryland in those days, basketball was king, as far as I can tell. And so that's sort of what maybe led him there. He thought he was going to a true basketball school, but he wasn't that successful there. And guess what? He had to move on eventually as well. So again, I think coaches are going to look after themselves rather first. I think that Blair and Henry both had been in a conference that we were looking at moving into. They understood it. They had friends there. They had history there, and that was okay with them. Those coaches who hadn't been there just didn't see it. Especially a coach like Sherman, he knew he was not performing at the level we really wanted him to perform at that last year. So that's really part of the conversation. I met with every head coach who wanted to see me, and we've spent time together privately before a decision was actually issued. I don't know that changed anybody's mind, but we did have those conversations, and every coach had a chance to provide input.
I mean, we may do this again, right? Depending on how the world changes in 2013, we may go through this again. So you have to be thinking about that, or the new Pacific Conference. Don't know if it's going to be 12, right? Teams may be moving. I think that becomes part of that consideration. And if you do move, does it make a fit? I just like the point you made, Dr. Loftin. There's so many things than just change that guy. There's so much more that is connected with it. It's almost like a spider web, the connection from coordinators and coaches and front office staff, and moving in and out, moving them out, and the money that's needed to move them in as well.
Yeah, most fans don't get that. They don't think about it that way. That's okay. I don't have any problem with that. They care about wins. They care about reputation. And they want to be excited. They want to have fun at a game. I'd like to have fun at the game too. But ideally, a person like me has an AD they can trust, an AD who thinks ahead, an AD who has a list in his pocket for every sport, not just one, but every sport, and that you can move. I mean, if a coach leaves you, you got to deal with that. I remember when JT Higgins won his national championship in men's golf. It wasn't but a day till Auburn called him, offered him a job there. And we had to react to that very quickly, and we did. But my point is that, when you have a coach who really has done something significant, like win a national championship, people see him as a target. And you can't think just about replacing people. You got to think about keeping people too, that you really want to keep. And so you got to have a nimble AD, and you got to have a nimble president or chancellor who's willing to pull this all together. The difficulty I always had, and I think it's true of every public university president or chancellor, is your boards are not necessarily. Most public school boards are small. They're appointed by the governor. They're there for various reasons. Some obvious, some not obvious, but they'll have their own opinions. And most of them are used to running something. They've been successful people in some business area, and they're used to running things. And they don't quite get initially how complicated a university that's public is because of money, how money works here. And if I were at Vanderbilt, life is so much easier when you got a private university in terms of money fungibility. I mean, the chancellor at Vanderbilt told me once, I'm putting $50 million a year out of my hospitals into athletics. Because guess what? With a small stadium, a small local fan base, not many sponsorships, they didn't have the money coming in from the SEC to be able to make it work. Their ticket sales weren't enough. sponsorships on enough. They had to have extra money. So $50 million a year. That was the only school in the SEC that had subsidized athletics when we joined. And Nick and I had this conversation several times about how much he had to find every year to keep athletics going at the level he wanted it. And many argued that was too much. They shouldn't be doing that. But Vanderbilt's come along. Yeah. This year's been pretty good for them, hasn't it?
Yeah, certainly has. John, not just in college, but you and I know in the pro world that sometimes, whether it's the AD or the GM, that coach is not my guy. And a change gets made that way. You inherit somebody. That's another thing that has to be thought of as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, all those factors come into play. And so, I mean, the NBA is a little bit different. I mean, that's the players kind of rule the roost there. So that's an interesting situation. But I mean, you've seen, even like back in the days when we were with the Spurs, Bodenholzer was always a great coach, but he still doesn't mean he gets fired from him. He just not be a right fit for that GM or whatever that program is. But you can't take it away that he's not a good NBA coach. So again, and those guys seem to find that, hopefully they eventually find the right fit that's good for them. But in college is going to be the same way. It's the world we live in. It's the professionalization of the process. It's the players getting more money. Players are getting more control now in this conversation. You got to make sure that you are, it's part of the reason we saw Tony Bennett leave. All right.
Right.
This guy runs a different kind of system. It's not an NBA friendly system that he runs, but he won. He gets the right kind of players. But now can he get the players that he wants to? Because again, they don't play a sexy, run up and down, light up the statistics. They play a winning culture. Everybody, that the team is greater than the individual parts, and that's a hard culture to sell this day and age to these kids. Who think they can play at that next level. And I do think there are probably a lot more kids in basketball that think they can get to the next level than guys in football. So, because there's so many other international or opportunities there. So it's, again, the coaches, at the end of the day, we pay them a lot of money, but when they're managing all of these issues, they probably earn it when it's all said and done.
And let's not forget the players now are allowed to have agents, but I think that's another episode.
But wait till the agent is also representing the coach, so that will be fun conversations at that point. So
yeah, isn't that the truth? All I can think of, Jimmy Sexton's making a lot of money.
Amen to that. Let me tell you one quick story at the end here. Remember Vince Dooley?
Yes.
Okay, so I happened to be sent to Georgia one time as the accreditor. So I'm the co-chair with the Alabama president of the visiting committee from the accreditor for schools in this part of the country. And so I'm there, going there. And he and I divide the territory up as co-chairs. I look at the financials primarily. So Vince had been fired a few years earlier. And because of that, the Georgia Foundation, the group that raised money for University of Georgia, had gotten so angry about that firing of a very long-standing popular coach that they stopped giving money to the University of Georgia. So Georgia's response was to create a new foundation to take the place of the old one that wouldn't give any money anymore to continue raising money for Georgia. So I'm there and I have a meeting with both boards, the old foundation board, the new foundation board. And I asked the question, what would it take, guys, for you to put down your differences and get together as one board, one foundation for the University of Georgia? And the chairman of the old foundation board looked around the room and said, if 4 of us die, we can do it. 4 of them died, they did it. So that gives you a sense of how a coach and the firing of a coach can have a ripple effect through the entire university structure. Now, the days of 30-year coaches are pretty well gone, I think. We've lost one at Penn State. We lost one at Georgia, things like that. But that was a history for a while. Coaches lasted for a long time. And that day, guys, is gone, in my opinion, totally gone.
And I think that's why there was patience in the past, is because they were tied together, right? The coaches and those boards, they had that trust of one another. Yeah. Interesting evolution, isn't it? Very interesting. Pleasure being back with both y'all. A lot of fun. Let's do it again, shall we? Thank you, Dr. Loftin. Thank you, John. Nick Savage, our producer, thank you. Richard Zane helping him, thank you as well. I'm Andrew Monaco. This has been College Sports Follow the Money. So glad you were with us. So long till next time.